Hello. Because we have 4 movies today, we're kind of keeping it going, and I was reminded of some of the films this time are being sponsored by certain sponsors. I forgot to mention that The Third Man was made possible for us by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association as a sponsor. So I'd like to thank the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. This film, Love and Mercy, is sponsored by the Champaign County Alliance for the Promotion of Acceptance, Inclusion, and Respect. And they've been a good friend of the festival for a long time. I'm always happy when they're here. To introduce the film, I'm going to call someone who is, even though he's a local film critic, this is his first official duty at Ebertfest. And so I specifically invited Chuck Kaplinski this year. And yes, some of you know his name, but for those of you who don't, Chuck Kaplinski is a local film critic and who has reviewed films for over 20 years in various Central Illinois publications until settling at Champaign's News Gazette and Springfield's Illinois Times, where his reviews and writing appear each week. Chuck is a member of the Broadcast Film Critics Association and the Chicago Film Critics Association, and he has a weekly film segment on WCIA-TV, Channel 3, and MIX, The Mix, 94.5 FM. Please help me welcome Chuck Kaplinski.
How are you? Thank you. You know, I've ever since this festival began 18 years ago, I've wanted to be a part of it and be up here, and I want to thank Nate Cohn and Chaz Ebert for allowing this to happen, knock it off the bucket list. But I have to say, now that I'm up here, this is absolutely terrifying. There are really a lot of you out there. I'm so glad that you're here. It's great to see this old theater with so many people in, to see a great film on this screen, and I know that the beautiful day outside must have called some of you out, but I'm glad that you're here because I tell you, this is not going to be time wasted seeing this film. I'm going to make the assumption that all of you here are discerning filmgoers. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And as discerning filmgoers, I'm going to make another assumption and say that there are probably times when you have a hard time finding something at the multiplex that interests you, something that challenges you, and that you probably stay home and maybe open up one of those antiquated things called books and read instead. I understand that completely. As discerning filmgoers, though, you have the great opportunity of having a choice. If there's nothing out there that you want to see, well, you just don't go. As a film critic, and I see many of my colleagues here in front of me, and they can agree or disagree with me, but we feel compelled to try and see everything that comes out. And that can be, at times, a soul-killing activity. When the latest Adam Sandler film is on the horizon, you start to have second thoughts. And I know that a piece of my soul died when I heard that the Transformers series was continuing. I am certainly no expert on religious tomes from around the world, but I do think that in most cultures that is a sign of the apocalypse. That being the case, the great thing about being a film critic happens maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And that's when I go into a theater and I am completely surprised. Even though I'm not supposed to have preconceptions about the films that I'm going to see as a human being, I can't help but have preconceptions. And I love those 3 or 4 occasions that occur every year when I go into a theater and suddenly my preconceptions are thrown out the window. Everything that I thought about this movie that I was going to see is suddenly turned on its head. And that was certainly the case for me when I saw Love and Mercy last year. Yeah, going into this thing, you read about films before you see them, you get some information, and I'm thinking, do I really need to see another musical biopic? And what's with this gimmicky casting of John Cusack and Paul Dano? I mean, really, this is going to be just, another thing. 15 or 20 minutes into this film, I realized how wrong I was. This is just an exceptional film in so many ways. And those of you who have seen it, I think you know what I'm speaking of. Those of you who are going to see it for the first time, I hope you're going to be genuinely surprised as I am. It's really hard to get away from formula. It's ironic, but right now we have 3 different musical biopics out in theaters. We have I Saw the Light about Hank Williams, Miles from Home about Miles Davis, and Born to Be Blue about Chet Baker. And all 3 of those films struggle to differentiate themselves, struggle to kind of put that whole musical biography formula aside. But they just are kind of trapped in that. We see the rise to fame. We see the personal problems that come because of fame. We see the downfall. And that's pretty much what we expect from films like that. That being said, the 3 central performances in those films, Tom Hiddleston as Hank Williams, Don Cheadle as Miles Davis, and Ethan Hawke as Chet Baker, make these films worth seeing, don't get me wrong. But you're not going to see that here today. Okay? The screenwriter for this film, Oren Moverman, who wrote and directed the great film The Messenger. He also had a hand in Jesus' Son, which played many years ago at the festival here. There was a script knocking around about Brian Wilson called Heroes and Villains. Moverman came on and he said, my movie is not called Heroes and Villains. He said, that's not what this is about. He says, this is a story about the depth of Brian Wilson's genius and emotion and hurt. And the director who then came on board, Bill Pollitt, he went with that. And his approach to the film was summed up in an interview in which he said, I wanted this film to be a portrait of a human being who has mental challenges and issues. I wanted to make something intimate. This is not about Brian Wilson, the celebrity or musician. This is about a human being in trouble. Keep that in mind as you're watching. Yes, we are going to see scenes in which the Beach Boys enjoy success. We see scenes in which their music goes to the top. But we get much, much more about that. We get much more than that. And really, the interesting thing about the film is that even if you're not a Beach Boys fan, or maybe just a casual fan, you come to understand the music by learning about Brian Wilson. You come to realize what he's trying to say with his music, what it means to him, and why it is so important. And I love that the filmmakers take that approach. Not the usual musical biopic approach, but we get to learn about the person, and then we talk about the art and all the problems that he has to contend with. After the screening, of course, we are going to have a Q&A, and I hope you hang around for that. This is going to be a continuation of one of the panels we had on Thursday in which we were talking about empathy in the movies, as well as certain portraits that we see in films about mental illness that are often stereotyped and how this film is different. So, enough of my yammering here. Ladies and gentlemen, Love and Mercy.